Personal computers were a very new thing. Nobody knew about them. Uh, Apple sold, I think in 1979, the year we came out with VisiCalc, Apple sold about 1/10 of the number of machines that they've sold Vision Pros. Everybody had one other app that was really, really important to them, and that justified buying that machine instead of using a cheaper, specifically developed machine that only did a calendar or something like that.
Welcome to the podcast, Dan. It's great to see you again, and thank
Thank
you
you.
for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, you've been building software since before most people even knew what a computer was. What was it about computers that grabbed you that early, and what's kept you excited about software for decades now?
As a child, I mean, I've been programming, developing products more than most people have been alive, and that's back in the 1960s. So almost nobody had access to any sort of computer back then. I only had access to it because I had a cousin who went to a local school that happened to have access through the Philadelphia Bureau of Education or whatever. And so he told me about it. And since it was public school, I was able to go over there and get a little bit of access to it. And a few of us used it. So,
Yeah.
and then through various hook or crook and a National Science Foundation course at the University of Pennsylvania, I was able to get access to computing resources, which was not a normal thing at that point. But at that point, I loved it. And I got paid for it. I was able to get jobs involving computing related stuff. So why not?
Yeah, that's very cool. And I'm excited to kind of dig into your journey into building software since then. So, VisiCalc was known as one of or actually the first killer app.
That's
And it was a spreadsheet tool that kind of transformed how business users worked. Could you tell us a little bit about what went into building VisiCalc and what was happening at the time that brought you and your co-founder to design and develop it?
Well, both of us were heavy into computers. We were at we met at Project Mac, the Multics project at MIT. The Multics project is the operating system project that eventually led to Unix, and now Linux came out of that software. And so it's pioneering, really pioneering software and stuff like that. With some of the top computer people in the world were involved in that. So I was lucky to be exposed to developing on a system where we could use the computer as if it was ours, because
Yeah.
it was a time sharing system. Uh, you know, dozens of people at the same time shared the same computer over a terminal. And then later I went to work at Digital Equipment Corporation, a mini computer manufacturer, where people got their own computer, had their own computers. They were thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and they fit in a desk or they were the size of refrigerators. But I got to work on develop software there. And in all cases, I was working on software that regular people used. I worked on software that was used for doing calculations and command line interface stuff and whatever at Multics. And then when I went to DEC, I worked on word processing and newspaper related stuff. One of the first screen-based word processors was one of the projects that I worked on when I was at DEC. It was sold for many years.
Mhm.
That ran on a mini computer that fit in a desk. The mini computer was, let's see, I'll show you what it looked like. You see this, there's kind of like a desk,
Yeah.
and there's a terminal on it. And, there's the terminal. Um, in the desk, you can see two floppy drives.
Right.
That's not a file cabinet. That was and this is the functional specification for it that was written in itself. To be able,
Yeah.
it was designed to do documents like this. Word processing was not a normal thing in those days. So I
Right.
was early in the world of word processing, computerized editing, in the typesetting in the newspaper world. So that was my background, was using computers for useful things by regular people who were not software people. Uh, yeah. So that's And then I went to Harvard Business School and learned about business and saw the need for within business of doing calculations. Why not do it like word processing, where you can, put in numbers and say, put some here, put some there, do this, that, like we do on the blackboard. And that out of that came the idea for the electronic spreadsheet. In those days, and then what to put it on. There were some small computers DEC was making. They weren't too interested in selling to me, whatever. They would have been a little expensive. Through fortuitously hooked up with doing software for an Apple II, and then TRS-80, the Radio Shack computer, and the Commodore PET computer, and then others. Eventually, the IBM PC came around.
Mm.
So personal computers were a very new thing. Nobody knew about them. Uh, Apple sold, I think in 1979, the year we came out with VisiCalc, Apple sold about 1/10 of the number of machines that they've sold Vision Pros. Now, Vision Pro is considered not successful, right? So if you
Yeah.
can think of, I mean, they sold 30 some thousand computers in 79, supposedly. Their personal computers, nobody knew about personal computers.
Yeah.
Nobody knew about computers. The only thing you knew about maybe is um, a um, a teller machine when you can, put your card in and you can get money out of it. That was the main connection to computing that normal people had. So they didn't think about what they would use. What would you use a personal computer for? The early ads showed it like, well, what are they talking about? Well, you'll use it to store your recipes. The concept that you would be able uh, to type in what you have in your refrigerator and it will find a recipe from somebody else in another country and tell you what to do, that was not a concept. They didn't know what would you use it for,
Yeah.
and but it was very well suited to doing what a spreadsheet does. So, and that's why it sort of took off because nothing else was as well suited.
Right. So people were kind of going out and buying this expensive piece of hardware to basically run this software, which was either word processing or VisiCalc at the time.
Yeah.
It kind of does remind me of how people are rushing out now to go buy Mac Minis to run these local AI models.
They don't necessarily know why they're buying the Mac Minis.
Yeah.
They just know that somehow this is going to make me better, right?
Right.
There is no, I can look at somebody else, except in certain areas. In certain areas, you can look at it, and it will make them 100 times better. Okay. In the case of a spreadsheet, it was real easy. You could show somebody and say, look, you do this, which is very similar to how you work today. You type in a number here and another number here, and then you can type in plus and minus and whatever, and then you copy it across like this, and then if you change this number, all these numbers change. And they started shaking and say, oh my God, I do that all week. You can do in 15 minutes what it takes me a whole week to do.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same, except it's better because I can ask questions. So now everybody had a different use. It turned out that the electronic spreadsheet was designed to be general purpose for business type of applications, among others. Very specifically looked at certain applications and made sure it was good for it. It was deterministic, so the answers were right. It was as good as doing it by hand. It was not worse. That was one of the problems. And then the design was this had to be easier to use the first time than doing it by hand. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And it had to produce as good results or better than you would have gotten if you had done it by hand. So that's there are some things about it that are different than today's AI systems for many applications. So that's but because it was so good for, and the other is it was really good for financial stuff for people who invested money. It was also good for a whole lot of other things. But people who invested money in all that found it really useful to do some of the Black-Scholes models and stuff that they were doing. It was very helpful for some of the and financial forecasting that they would do, and et cetera. And they saw the value of a personal computer to them. Okay. People in general don't generalize when they see a tool. They don't know, most people don't know how to generalize. Show the spreadsheet to a regular person. They'd say, oh, well, that's the computer's doing that. Computers can predict the weather and they know how everything, computers can do everything. Not that But, because they just thought, oh, of course, because they didn't know. You showed it to a computer person. They said, I could write a program to do that and it'll do a better job than yours did. Your thing is it's running on this toy computer. But if you showed it to the right business person, they would be the ones who would get all excited and say, that's exactly what I do. If you showed them the thing that was exactly. Now, for some people, if
Mhm.
you showed them any business thing, they could figure out it's for them. But most people, unless you showed it for their problem, they didn't generalize that it could be that way. But so that's why some people adopted it right away and became wizards, in their where they're, they would be the, oh my God, I can look, you're so good, you get all this stuff done. Well, I'm just fast. I won't tell you what I have at home, my personal computer. So that's and there were other, it it paid for itself for those of you who are already using time sharing systems where you pay by the hour, and you were paying a few $1,000s a month to use these systems to do some financial forecasting of some sort, you could replace it with an Apple II, a Sony Trinitron TV, and VisiCalc, and a printer for a few $1,000s. So it pays for itself in a few weeks. So it was a no-brainer. So it was 100 times better than doing it by hand than
Yeah.
the other way. And then the other way that people were doing it, or so much cheaper that the payback was 2 weeks. And
Wow.
that's what you have to look at. Donna Dubinsky, who was the head of, at some points, a Palm computer, the Palm Pilot, she talked about how everybody used their standard apps, the address book and the calendar and stuff, but everybody had one other app that was really, really important to them, and that justified buying that machine instead of using a cheaper, specifically developed machine that only did a calendar or something like that. That there is some specific thing that you need that justified it. And the spreadsheet was general purpose enough and easy enough to understand how it was general purpose to know that you could use it for your applications. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, AI is not necessarily in that area yet. It sometimes looks like it can until you look under the hood carefully and you say it really didn't understand. Did a really good job, but it really didn't understand what was going on there, and it made a mistake that's not even a rookie mistake. It was a clueless mistake, and in certain areas. So you have to know the area to do that. But on the other hand, it can do. There are certain things where it's incredibly good and worthwhile if you know how to use it. The spreadsheet did not do certain things. It didn't lay things out in ways that are appropriate. It let you lay it out the way you wanted it. But you had to figure out what was the best way to explain it to you or to a particular other person by how you laid out the numbers, the words, and stuff like the calculations. And that's a lot of that isn't there yet. A spreadsheet does not do everything, but it was a very useful tool. A word processor was not a thing that could write wills, but it helped you write a will. There were programs that would ask you questions and write wills, but they only could write wills,
Yeah.
and lawyers used it. But it was much better to have a word processor to be able to do anything. So as a general purpose tool that you can use to get your job done, that's we've had those type of things. I don't know if today's AI tools are there yet, except in certain areas. And they keep
Yeah.
changing. So if you get good at them, it's unclear if what you've gotten good at is going to help you 6 months from now.
Yeah, that's true. Where these days it's like you get really competent with your Claude setup, but then Codex is better, and then you got to switch back and
And
forth.
then suddenly the prompts you needed to do are no longer needed, but you need
Right.
different types of things. It's like you got really good at being able to write this type of prompt with this particular model, and it turned out that turns out to be negative. It makes it worse. If you used a different prompt, would be better. And how do you know? Well, you can't look into it to see how it's working. So it's it was just really bizarre on some of
Yeah.
the stuff when it was so good with some stuff, but so bad with others, and in an unintuitive way. And we intuit that it acts like a person. With the spreadsheet, we intuited that it acted like a calculator and paper and pencil. And it was programmed specifically to be that way.
Yeah.
So much so that we used, in essence, decimal arithmetic instead of binary arithmetic. Why? We wanted to make sure that the results you would get when doing arithmetic stuff would be the same numbers you would see on your calculator, the same ones you would see by hand, because you can't represent in binary certain numbers that you can represent in decimal and vice versa. And so we wanted it to be as much like it. We even made it work the same way in terms of the order of calculations. It didn't use precedence initially because
Mhm.
the calculators of the day didn't use precedence. They used different types of systems depending on which one you used.
Yeah.
So that's you know th- you could understand it, and you knew where to trust it and where not.
Yeah.
So that's I think a difference of the tools back then.
Right.
And you got to feel that it was a tool. You were riding it, and you could, I mean, you had control over it, and you knew it's like when we understood how cars work because you could look at the linkages and you could actually see the parts and all this. Even with cars, a really strange thing happened with a car. With the Prius, when I took my foot off the gas
Yeah.
and took my foot off the brake, it started creeping. And
Okay.
why was it creeping? You know, it was an electric car. Well, it specifically did that because so many people were used to, if you took with a gas, automatic transmission car, if you took your
Yeah.
foot off the brake, when you're stopped, it would start moving forward. People were used to that.
Mm.
And also it would keep you from rolling backwards, which you'd hit the person behind you. So I think what it was is that Toyota programmed it. From what I could read, they programmed it to do something it didn't need to do to make it feel to you like the old one. That was
Yeah.
really, when I saw that, I was really surprised by that. I'll have to go ask ChatGPT what it thinks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it kind of they built it around user expectations, even though, like for you, you skipped from stick to
Right.
electric. You kind of missed that,
Well,
like what?
I had children.
Yeah.
I had a caravan,
Uh,
minivan, so I sure had, the other types. I was used to that. I was used to both, but I was just
I
surprised
see.
that the electric car did something it didn't need to do, where it could be better and not roll into the car in front of me and not waste the electricity. So the user interface matters,
Yeah.
and I think with a lot of the AI systems, we've sort of punted on some of that to say, well, we'll just do it conversationally. You
Right.
but that means we have a mental model of what the other side is, and this isn't the same. The
Yeah.
mental model of a word processor is a certain mental model you have of what it's doing and what it knows about. It knows about spaces and how to word wrap and about page breaks, and maybe spelling to some extent. But you also have, spreadsheet. You have a mental model of what it's doing, and all sorts of stuff are like that. And we have a mental model of the LLMs.
Mhm.
Mental model is another person.
Yeah. And you make a good point about general building generally versus building specific tools. Um, and even to this day, we continue to see people attempt to make the spreadsheet, like make a new version of the spreadsheet with bells and whistles, but most of the world is still operating on basically the original design of what a
It's the
spreadsheet.
original design with a lot of additions
Yeah.
specific to very narrow areas.
Yeah.
Nobody uses everything in Excel. Somebody uses almost everything. And that's why one reason Excel is so dominant is you can't replace it because somebody won't be able to use it, so they're stuck with Excel.
Yeah.
And the general spreadsheet design was a pretty good general purpose design. Lucky me, and lucky us that somebody did it, I guess. And but there's a lot of specific stuff. It lent itself to putting the specific stuff in to be
Yeah.
able to handle other areas, um, knowing the area it was for, and then people learned that. And then once you've learned a general purpose tool, you would rather use it than a special purpose tool because you know what it can do. And if you want something a little different, you know that it can do that. And the special purpose tool may not be able to.
Yeah. And From your time building and seeing VisiCalc get adopted and then tools that you've built after, what when you look at how people actually adopt new tools, not how builders expect that people will adopt their tools that they're building, what's kind of the pattern that you've seen? Is there something consistent in how humans decide a tool is worth changing their behavior for? We talked about this a little bit.
I mean, they may still have the same needs. Like before VisiCalc, I did word processing. A lot of people didn't have needs for it, but typing pools did, and which is people that just type for a living. And newspapers were. It was better to have the reporter type it right in to the computer system that could then be typeset, so you don't have the intermediate of the typing it on a typewriter, on a type operator reading it and then typing it into a computer, into the system for typesetting and then printing. So the uh, the spreadsheet did what they needed, what they were doing, what they needed to do, and fit that model. I don't know. There's the next thing that then after word processing spreadsheet, and then I did my demo program. My demo program lets you mock up a screen of a character-based computer screen, and then mock up another one and another one. So you could mock up what you wanted your application to be, and you could very easily move things around and figure out how to, in the 80 characters by 25 rows, being able to, or whatever it was, to be able to lay out your application and each of the screens. And when you push buttons, it would switch seamlessly between the screens, so it looked like it was working. So that was called Dan Bricklin's demo program. And it was extremely popular among developers and product managers, because what they could do is they could say, this is what I want to do, or I need to visualize and figure out how to lay it out before I program it. And it was voted best programmer tool of 1985 and 6 or something like that. I have awards up there from that. So that was people were working the way they wanted to work. I made it easy to work. Like, there were special characters on the IBM PC that would do line graphics, that could do a horizontal line, a corner, and stuff like that. So you could get what looked like boxes with not doing it with just underbars and minuses and pluses, so you could get nice looking screens. And I made it really easy. You said, I'm doing that. And then you hit the arrow, and it would automatically, as you moved your arrow left, right, and down, it would put the right character in. So it was tuned to what you wanted to do. It was easy to copy and paste, and you could put one screen behind another and then change little pieces of it, have, overlays, like in Photoshop with overlays and stuff, so that you only had to do the background once, and then you could use it on every screen. So it worked sort of the way you would want to work, but it made your work much better in terms of that. It took paper and pencil, turned it to the screen.
Yeah.
And if you're doing graphics and stuff like that, a mouse is much better to do that.
Yeah.
And the old printers we had could only do characters. And then, of course, we ended up with laser printers that could put a dot anywhere, so you could do anything for output that could be done in with dots. So as new hardware comes in, we get new stuff. A portable device with touch now opens up a whole area. A device that you always have with you or something like that makes a difference. A device with a camera. When the decision to put a camera in a phone, we can thank this person we can thank for that, Philippe Kahn, who decided that was a really important thing to do. And he did some of the initial software for that. He was very well known in the software world for some language stuff and other stuff. But it turned out he was into photography, pictures of when his kid was first born in the delivery room and all that with the
Yeah.
and because of that, we ended up with phones with cameras. And then we ended up with, of course, you're going to have a camera in the smartphones, and that's changed everything. But soon as we had reasonable cameras and phones, that made a big change. So whenever you get a hardware change, it enables stuff. So I was interested in the Vision Pro, because it's different. It's a different interface, how you interface for it. And what is it, what is it good for? What type of interface? Well, for looking at certain things, it's really good. For the immersive feeling is incredible. Unclear exactly what interfaces, but where then they started adding controllers. Some of the head up the VR stuff, they're using controllers. How you can do that. We're still learning what is the right combination
Hmm.
of interfacing to the person. With AI, as we're doing it today, a lot of it is they're just sort of imagining the AI will figure it out and do it all itself, and we don't even need the person. They worked it out. The printers union did work out how to be able to deal with some of the automation that was coming in, because in the printing industry, various types of automation have always occurred over time, and they sort of figured out how to do some of that. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know what we're doing today. There's a lot of discussion going on, uh, about. I know there is discussion among some people, but that how do we, if we're not talking about, for many things, we're not talking about, we you know, um, giving a tool to a person as much as doing it for some stuff. And that's, I don't know how does that fit?
Right.
The nice thing about tools are, you're a carpenter and you're using tools. It's different than being an architect who says, put this here and put that there. The carpenter has to make sure it actually fits, even though the wood is slightly off and stuff like that. And, how do you, be able to, um, work with it to get it? Or do you just say, well, the AI will be able to do it all itself? And then, if so, then what does that do about that job? We redo the job so it can't be done without the AI. What happens if the AI is more
Mhm.
expensive than we expected it to be? What happens if there is, um, it's one thing to have the Strader Hormuz stop, but what happens if all these, back to the, Linux and Multics and stuff like that?
Yeah. And kind of back to software too, a lot of software has been about democratizing specialization in a way. So for VisiCalc, it made it so that anyone could do accounting type uh, functions within if they were running a business. The iPhone kind of democratized the internet by putting it in our pockets. Um, when everyone can do what used to require a specialist, what then happens to quality? And I feel like this is, of course, happening with a
Well,
little
it's
bit with AI. Or is it so that like the tool kind of has to adapt so that the specialization isn't
yeah.
necessary for the user?
I mean, it's, VisiCalc made accountants better at what they did.
Mhm.
It meant people who couldn't take the time to do what they should do now could. A small business, a place of worship could now do the type of stuff for budgeting that only big companies could, who could pay people to do that. They knew what they needed to do. It was a tool that enabled them to do that better. Photoshop let you do things that only certain artists knew how to do, you know, and stuff. And so it's it's not that. I mean, in some cases, you find that the other practitioners become more valuable in certain respects. And I mean, some programmers are now more valuable, because the senior programmers, than they were before. And because otherwise, you won't be able to find the problems and know what to specify. And how long that'll last, we'll see. It's when you make things available to people, uh, that I mean, that's the way our society has worked in many ways. Henry Ford making automobiles affordable by a regular person, that was his goal, right? That his employees even could afford it, could afford a Model T. I think that was one of his goals. And, so that, a lot of the stuff that we have is making it so that everybody has access to certain things, but we still have Ferraris and fast electric cars.
Yeah.
But it's for those that really want and stuff and can afford it. But the democratization is, if something is useful, sometimes at least we're able to get good enough for people where before it wasn't good enough or it took too long. There was a barrier, so it reduced friction of a certain sort. And yeah, I will say, I mean, one of the issues is that there's this hand waving that, you know, AGI, we're going to be so smart, we don't have to worry about all the problems. It will really understand. Trust me, it's going to really understand. And then, well, then how are we going to have it do things? Well, we'll have a robot, because the robot will do what people can do, because everything we've built is built around something with fingers and arms, right? And legs, and being able to see and whatever. The physical world has been built around how we are in many ways. Um, and you find that out if you have a disability of some sort. You start finding out how much it is so much dependent. Parts of the world are dependent on certain abilities the average person has, and not everybody. And most people throughout their lives learn that they have something that ends up where they're on the um, lesser ability end, even if only temporarily, and learn about that. And so, but there's this, well, we're going to solve it by having robots that will be able to do everything we do. So therefore, you don't need us. Well, why do we need us? So then what? And what's the purpose of it? And what is the purpose uh, you know, uh, of it? Well, we at least it said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all men, which meant all people. Didn't it really, but it really did. It conceptually it did.
Mhm.
Uh, so therefore, we should be working along those lines. How do we do that? I don't know. Are we building towards that? How do we, there was in the PC days, there were people who their thing was to get powerful computers on people who needed powerful computing desks. That's like Sun Microsystems to get, these powerful computers for these uh, those type of computers. But then there was a couple people who decided that they wanted it for everybody. Okay, and that was Bill Gates and Paul Allen. They wanted a computer on every desk, not just the desks of those that it should be, but on every desk and then eventually every home. And then and then Jobs, of course, is I want to do it in a way that is aesthetically correct and fits with people well. He was the fits with people, and of course, Gates, famously said he wished he had Jobs's ability to do that, and Jobs needed, which
Mhm.
he could have done some of the stuff that Microsoft was able to do. And so we had leaders who made some of that happen. It could have gone a different way, but it didn't. And some of it is people voting with their pockets, with their pocketbooks and their feet, against stuff. How do we have AI now? Well, we have these great chips that are really fast at doing a particular algorithm. Why do we have those chips? Oh, they were game chips to do graphics, computer graphics, to play computer games better. That's where that development. What did NVIDIA used to make? I mean, they made graphic cards, and the graphic cards were for doing graphical games. So how we got where we get, who knows? It wasn't so that we would do AI, it was so that we could make Doom faster, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever. I mean, that's not the world. But so a lot of things like the CD-ROM, why did that come in, initially and stuff like that? I mean, initial uses were for things like an encyclopedia on a CD-ROM. That was Gary Kildall pushed for that. Microsoft did well with Encarta. And then instead of buying an encyclopedia, you bought a personal computer with Encarta, and now you had, for the same price as an encyclopedia plus the bookcase to put it on, you
Yeah.
could have the personal computer. Now, because you had the personal computer at home, it meant that when your student went away to school and they wanted to communicate with you with instant messaging, with AOL instant messaging, you had a computer to be able to connect to them and be able to to get that. And when businesses, it was interesting, businesses started putting computers on desks for word processing, spreadsheets, and some database and stuff, and then presentation graphics. And got on every desk, but they were just sitting there doing what they needed for that, and which was great and useful. And then they started needing sort of servers, and they connected them with LANs, with local area networks. So they were sort of networked, but only within the floor of the company. And then Lotus Notes came along, which was a program that let people do things where you ended up communicating all over the place. It was very useful. So these window computers with mice, windows, and a local area network to a communications line, high-speed communications line, suddenly ended up in all these companies. Then Netscape came along, and
Mhm.
now we had the browser and the server, and the hardware was already there on the desks, already. So they didn't have to get people to buy new hardware. It's really hard. When we did VisiCalc, we had to buy, for all our testers, we had to buy the hardware.
Yeah.
When I did my Note Taker HD app for the iPad, I had to buy everybody that would use it an iPad, for my testers and for my designers and all those. I had to buy them because they didn't have them yet.
Yeah.
That's so now we at least certain things work, but what are we going to need? That's where you get into the what other hardware, like a robot stuff or a robot. I don't know what we're going to need and how are we going to get them to buy it. I don't know.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I did want to ask you about this concept that you wrote about called the cornucopia of the commons,
Oh yeah,
an essay that you did early 2000s. This idea that systems get better the more people use them, but when people use it more, it's not necessarily because they're trying to be generous. They're just
right.
doing it for
It's
their own
there.
benefit.
Mhm.
Curious about where this kind of came from, this thinking, and how does it apply to everything that's happening
Oh
today?
well, it was. I was very interested in sociology related stuff and all that. I also wrote one about the Little Prince. The Little Prince and the Fox and stuff like that, and about which gets into community and why being online works and stuff. But this one about the cornucopia of the commons, which is to go against. There was a paper about the tragedy of the commons that everybody would, if you had a common area, to graze, everybody would overgraze it, because everybody's using it. And then the tragedy was that, you get overuse. And this was showing that no, it turned out there's some systems that the more people use it, the more valuable it is. And that, and one of them was, Facebook is an example of that. I was thinking about blogging and other stuff also, but that the but you're using it. Oh, the particular one I looked at was the Sony thing, right? There was the whole thing
What's
of
Napster?
what and
Napster?
Napster and
Yeah.
Napster especially. That Napster, you put you named your files for your purposes, so you'd remember what track each was from the music that you ripped and put into your computer. And then when you shared it, it was there, and those names would then be used in the name of the album you had typed in. So therefore, you're helping yourself suddenly helped everybody else, and you were helping yourself not out of altruism, but
Mhm.
out of just your normal how the thing was designed. So the system was designed, not necessarily purposely, but it worked out that way. And there were other systems like that were designed to that worked. The design, the architecture was such that more use ends up in it becoming better. Now that also means that sometimes whoever is dominant becomes even more dominant, and there's a downside to that in society in certain ways. But that's now the AI stuff is a little different in that it's sort of piggybacking on a system that was built like that, which is the web, whereby me putting stuff up and having ads on my site and whatever and making me useful made you come and I made some money and you liked it and we all made everything better. Or we do it altruistically. And so they're like Wikipedia, which, was wonderful. The more very little bit of input from some people who cared about one thing. If you have enough people caring about enough stuff, then you end up knowing about all sorts of stuff. But then the AI systems are basically taking from that and providing something else, but not providing anything back in a way. So that's the scary thing we have is that, if there's no Stack Overflow and stuff like that, how are we going to learn, get all that stuff if none of the stuff that people are writing is, new stuff? It all has to be created in the first place out of whole cloth from AI. And does that fit the model? Well, that's not the model of how the LLMs were built. So it's unclear how that fit. Is that a bug in the internet in a way that it lent itself to that where it sort of can go off to the side? Or is that were you able to say, well, the internet was a good thing to get that. So now we have this wonderful thing because of it. And all
Yeah.
those people that provided, we thank them very much. How are we gonna remunerate them in some way? I don't know. We're not. We're giving all the money is going to those that are doing the that had copied it. So that's, and what does that do about artists and how do artists,
Mm.
how does that all fit in? I have an essay about how will the artists get paid, which was about Napster and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I talk about historically, how did artists get paid? Because they said, well, people are ripping off music. Well, now it turns out that the artists still get paid, and there are many ways, and I go into a lot of that stuff. But the thing is that, does that still hold? And, with when you have the advantage one way, and I don't know, it's happening as it's happening, and it makes interesting commentary. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's optimized to go where we want it to go. And I don't know how we decide where we want it to go as opposed to some people want it to go.
Yeah. That's a good point. It also kind of speaks to how early we are with a lot of this. It's like machine learning and AI has existed for so many years, but it's really just like taking off right now when LLMs became more mainstream. But it's like we have all these tools and toys flying about, but there's no proper direction and into or strategy to like where things are gonna
Where we
go.
What is this and
Like,
what is this tool compared to other I mean, we've had, uh, uh, computer vision, which
yeah,
it's similar in certain respects to part of the technology used in LLMs and stuff, and that was used for a certain particular set of stuff, and we've used that. I mean, you have it in your cameras. You've had it for years. Camera, you don't even think about it. Camera knows where a face is. That's amazing to those of us who come from the old camera days. The fact that your camera is able to find the faces, figure out an average, and focus at the right place to get the right thing. That's pretty cool. But today's systems do a particular thing, but because they have language in a way that seems so much like a real person, it um, it sort of covers over all sorts of other stuff that might be good and bad, and strengths and weaknesses, and distracts us perhaps from that technology of other ways we may want to use it, and interface to it. We're so People have always talked about wanting to have a computer assistant that you just tell them what to do, and they know to do it. We always talked about that, but then whenever you saw movies or something like that, and there's the evil villain or whatever, and they have their henchmen, and it's always like, wait, I'll do it myself, right? Because the time is you don't want to give it to that other person. You want to have control yourself. You want the person who is the mastermind to be, knows what they want, to be able to have the levers to be able to do it what they want. And I mean, I love driving a car more than I like being driven in a car, and I don't drive a stick now, but I do when I get in a car that has a stick,
yeah,
which I get to periodically, and that's but so this that I don't know where how that feeling fits in. This feeling of do we want do we want something to, do we want chauffeurs or do we want tools? There are different between that. And how do we build the tools that enable us? Um, you know, People who are verbal in a certain way are well suited to certain types of systems that are verbally oriented into that. Oh, it's also, it's kind of funny that they keep coming back to the command line interface. In the old days, computers, we interfaced to them by typing some commands when it punch cards originally, and then, but then we, typed them in on a computer. And then eventually we went to drop down menus and stuff. And we're sort of going back to some of the command
Yeah.
line stuff with the systems, the AI systems, and all. Oh, well, the way it works is just like it used through the command line, because a good way to do it initially. It's like going through birth again. It's that circle of life, going back to the command line. Yeah, it's a circle of life. That the new systems are going through some of the same.
Yeah, it's all CLIs and markdown files. We're, like,
Yeah.
back to the beginning.
Yeah. So you don't come out of you had PCs your whole life, I take it,
Yes, I
and
did.
so you can't imagine them not as much
Exist.
without there being that stuff. And but I don't know how much seeing the progression. I mean, those of us that come from the old days of stuff, watching the progression and stuff as I take my old computers and throw them in the garage or whatever, or
Yeah.
throw them away and watch the progression over time, how the feeling of you know is it like this or how things are going to progress. I don't know how that feels, uh to know about what is just the way it is as opposed to it's a step along the way.
You've watched decades of software come and go,
Mhm.
and knowing what you know about how people end up adopting new tools, what's maybe one thing you'd tell someone building software in today's climate?
Well, it helps to do something you care about, so at
Yeah.
least you'll be happy with it, when you build it. You have no idea. um so that's one. Do things in a way that if it doesn't succeed, you'll still be happy with what you did. You won't look back on it and say, "Why did I waste my time?" So that's one of the things. But I mean, I can't tell you in terms of what's going to be successful or not because I've had things that are successful and things that weren't. So I can't be sure. Um, but I mean, I care very much about making things that take advantage of new capabilities the capabilities are much, much 100 times better than something before, and it's night and day different than what was before in that particular capability, and then figuring out what is that good for, and then can you actually do it, and applying it. That's one. Um, listen to your users, that's, but, you never know. So, I mean, sometimes you're lucky. I was very lucky, that what I built, I happen to be good at building things that regular people could use. I happened to be at the right time with the right background that almost nobody else had at the time. I lucked out with that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what individuals have right now where it's just the right time for it, but try it. It's fun, and set it up so that you won't be upset if it doesn't work. People look at AI that we have today and we say that looks very fertile. I don't know how, but somehow it's fertile. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses, the management is saying, "I know this is fertile. You figure out how to use it. You know, you use it and you figure it out." It's like saying we don't understand what grows where and what type of soil and whatever. You just plant everywhere and see if you can figure out maybe something will grow. That's uh, I'm worried about that. Some of that in terms of it, not as. Um, uh, but if we don't have that scatter approach, we're not going to find where the good things are. I mean, a lot of it is that's the throwing spaghetti against the wall, seeing what sticks is the way we find out what sticks.
Yeah.
But how many people are gonna be hurt in the process? Who is paying for that and who isn't? That's very scary today because the
Mhm.
when we did stuff, it didn't affect very many people initially. Today, the things that are happen affect a lot of people, maybe life and death right away. And mistakes or not understanding certain things can have some really drastic effects that we didn't have to worry about in our day. So that's a very scary thing, and you have to think in terms of that. So it helps to think broadly about stuff.
This was a great episode. I learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners will too. But thank
I
you
hope
again
so.
for joining us, Dan.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for reaching out.